for our speakers, if you'll see me in your top right hand corner, I have a 3-minute card and I have a 1-minute card, which I'll just pop up so that you can keep a track of your timekeeping. But now to hand it over to you, Zachary.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you everyone for coming along to this session. It's great to see so many colleagues and friends on this Zoom call. So hopefully this will be a good chance to get some feedback from you all on what I am discussing. So the title as submitted to the conference was Solving the Crisis in Evidence Synthesis, but I started thinking this is probably a bit too grandiose, and it's actually what we're trying to do with this project is actually to address some of the confusion in evidence synthesis. So with a fear of overselling and under-delivering, I've modified the title somewhat for this talk. So hopefully what we're doing with this project is to help solve and reduce some of the confusion in evidence synthesis through the use of developing a structured taxonomy for evidence synthesis. By way of introduction and some of my disclosures as well, these are some of my roles. So I'm a director at JBI, the director of the JBI Adelaide Grade Centre, and I'm also the current chair of the Guidelines International Network. And this project has been funded by the NHMRC Investigator Grant Funding Scheme, but I have no direct or indirect financial conflicts of interest. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm here in Adelaide on a beautiful sunny Adelaide morning, and where I am, it's the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this land always was and always will be Kaurna land. So what I'm hoping to discuss over the next 9 or so minutes is evidence synthesis, different types of evidence synthesis, our plan to develop this evidence synthesis taxonomy, and where we are at currently with our efforts. Now, looking at who's here today on the call, it looks, I know many of you who are here, and I'm sure you don't need too much of an introduction to evidence synthesis. But I thought I'd just share this definition with you all on evidence synthesis, which is from Evidence Synthesis International. And myself and colleagues, we actually hunted around to try to find what we thought was the best definition for evidence synthesis, and this is what we thought might be the best one at the moment. And really it goes into the importance of evidence synthesis and the fact that evidence syntheses are the evidence base in evidence-based policy or evidence-based medicine, etc. And it goes on to the importance of explicit, transparent and rigorous methods for conducting evidence synthesis. But what I think is important is this is not a definition for systematic reviews, but rather evidence synthesis more generally. And what I want to talk about more today is all the different types of evidence syntheses. Now, we also do know that the evidence synthesis movement and systematic reviews in general as well are facing a little bit of a crisis or a number of challenges. And one of the challenges is that there are just so many systematic reviews and evidence synthesis projects being conducted at the moment. A recent investigation found that there's approximately about 80 reviews being published every single day. And we know across all of those reviews, there are a lot of reviews that are duplicate reviews and potentially redundant reviews because others have already answered the question using trustworthy methods. Unfortunately, we also know that a lot of these reviews are of poor quality or are very poorly reported, which hinders their use in practice or to inform guidelines or policy. And they're not adhering necessarily to reporting standards like PRISMA or following good methods. And unfortunately, a lot of these reviews aren't always translated, say, into clinical practice guidelines and recommendations within guidelines, or actually being translated into practice as well, and may not be contributing to a knowledge translation pathway. And from our own experience, we're finding increasingly that a lot of these reviews that are being done are probably using incorrect approaches or even methods for the question that they're trying to answer. And this is something we've particularly seen with the explosion and popularity of scoping reviews, where people are starting to try to use scoping reviews to answer every single evidence synthesis question under the sun, when in actual fact they should probably be using a different approach. So what am I talking about here when I'm mentioning evidence synthesis? Well, there are a lot of different reviews now that can be done under this broad banner of evidence synthesis, and there's a few examples here on the slide, and quite a few different authors have looked into some of the different approaches and started to try to classify and categorize all of the different approaches to evidence synthesis. And if we look at systematic reviews themselves, we can also see that there are now a lot more or a lot of different types of systematic reviews that can be done, which answer a number of different questions. Some which have more guidance or standards in place than others as well. And this is an evolving field also. And the same goes with scoping reviews. Perhaps there's many different types of scoping reviews as well. Now, what this has led to is really a fair bit of confusion amongst authors and potential systematic reviewers or people conducting evidence synthesis projects about what approach to choose. And myself and colleagues, we run a lot of training programs. We also act as editors or associate editors for journals. And we're seeing that there is a lot of confusion and a lack of clarity about what evidence synthesis approach they should be using and what's best suited to them for their particular question that they're trying to answer. I can say that there is a really nifty tool which can help to answer this question, which some of you may have heard of, which is called the What Review is Right for You tool, where you answer a set of questions and then you actually the program itself will suggest an approach for you. But even this tool obviously needs to be informed by some sort of comprehensive understanding of all the different approaches in evidence synthesis. And this leads me to what we're trying to do with this project. As we see more and more evidence synthesis projects being done, we see its importance being highlighted further across the globe, and this growing enthusiasm for evidence synthesis, we need to make sure that people who are conducting these projects are actually making the best choices in terms of the design and conduct of these evidence synthesis projects. We want to make sure that people are conducting these as efficiently and accurately as possible, and we want to make sure that these syntheses are trustworthy as well. And one way to perhaps achieve some of these aims is to develop a resource that guides and drives appropriate synthesis approaches that respond to relevant clinical and policy needs and questions. And we think this could be a research-informed evidence synthesis taxonomy. Now, we're not the first to advocate for an evidence synthesis taxonomy or some sort of categorization or classification scheme in evidence synthesis, and quite a few authors have done some work in this previously. Every few years or so, a new classification scheme actually comes out. One of the early schemes, and that was quite popular, was that by Grant and Booth, where they provided their typology of 14 review types. But once again, this is a little bit out of date now. And in fact, in some previous work, it was actually said that it's probably going to be too hard to develop an overall taxonomy of all types of reviews and evidence synthesis, because the rate of development of new approaches is perhaps too fast and there is a lot of overlap. So maybe we're aiming too high with this project, but I think what we're trying to, if we really want to address some of these issues in evidence synthesis, and if we look at this position statement from Evidence Synthesis International, we need to find some way to agree as an international community of people conducting and experts in evidence synthesis to try to ideally come up with a shared understanding of different approaches in evidence synthesis. Ideally shared language and shared methods as well, and also acknowledge that evidence synthesis will continue to evolve and continue to grow. So creating static taxonomies or classification systems probably isn't the way forward. In fact, we might need a continuously updated and evolving, living, if you will, evidence synthesis taxonomy. And just to highlight that this is an increasing or an evolving field, even just this week, there was this publication from the WHO looking at systematic reviews in chemical risk assessment. So Where does this lead us? Well, we want to create this taxonomy. We want it to be a comprehensive resource for anyone interested in evidence synthesis and to direct people to conducting the right review for them, for their question, and to use rigorous and transparent methods. And this is just a very simple example or schematic of how this might look. Obviously, we're talking about evidence synthesis. This is a kingdom we're talking about. And then there's lots of different types of evidence synthesis approaches. And underneath each of these are types. And just a caveat here, this is by no means comprehensive. This is just for illustrative purposes only. Under each of these different types, there are also a number of, let's say, divisions or subtypes for these evidence synthesis approaches. And if we take prognostic systematic reviews as an example, within prognostic systematic reviews, you could be looking at overall prognosis, prognostic factors, prognostic models, or treatment effect modifiers, or stratified medicine. And then if we pick just one of these subtypes, like overall prognosis, then we want to make sure that we're directing people to the methodological guidance, if there's any software that they can use, if there's an extension to the Prisma statement that they might be relevant for this type, or if there's a grade approach as well for this type of review, and so on. And hopefully what we want to do is create this sort of map for all of the different types, not replicate the actual guidance, but actually provide people the way to get to the relevant guidance or approaches for each of these different reviews. So where are we up to? We're currently forming an advisory panel, and it's been great to see so many people join this panel and be willing to give us some of their time. We're undertaking a scoping review of evidence synthesis approaches, which we may transition to a living scoping review so we can always keep up to date. We're also making sure that we are doing this in a collaborative spirit and reaching out to others who are doing similar work so that we can make sure we do have a shared and common understanding, and we're building infrastructure to support this project. And if you're interested, please do get involved. The people here are the perfect people we want to be talking to. So if you are interested, please do send me an email. So that's, I can see I'm basically out of time, but so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build this evidence synthesis taxonomy, which will be a living repository and compendium identifying different approaches, methods, and guidance. And we want to make sure that people are doing the right reviews for the right reasons, using the right methods. And that is the end of my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions from anyone.